I'd like to welcome you again to today's webinar, Transforming the Children's Medicaid System, Building Capacity and Preparing for the Changes Ahead. This is the final webinar in a three-part series to provide providers and stakeholders an overview of the timelines and roadmap of the children's system transition to managed care, along with the population of children to be included and how providers will need to prepare for the changes ahead. If you were unable to join us for the previous webinars, you may access the recording and slides of the prior webinars on our website, mctac.org. In today's webinar, we will review some of the key elements of transition and detail some of the areas providers would need to build knowledge and capacity around, and discuss some of the lessons we've learned from the adult transition, outline some of the training and technical assistance plans for the year, and point providers to some tools and resources that are available. That will be our agenda for the day. Just a reminder about the purpose and role of MCTAC. We are a training and consultation and educational resource center here to provide training and support to mental health and substance use disorder providers in New York State, with a focus on assisting providers in improving business, organizational, and clinical practices to prepare for the transition to managed care. We work with a number of expert partners along with our state partners. Once again, I want to thank you for joining us, and we will now move on to what's ahead for New York State. So, as you're aware, there are many changes that are happening in the state right now, and this list serves as an overview of many of the transitions. You see that Children's Health Homes started in January 2016 statewide, and new state plan services are expected to begin January of 2007 statewide as well. Transition timeline to managed care will begin in January of 2017 for New York City and Long Island, and in July for the rest of the state. There's also the Children's Home and Community-Based Services, which also will be begin and transitioning in January of 2017 in New York City and Long Island, and again in July of 2017 for the rest of the state. Along with some other transitions, there's the rest of the state adult behavioral health managed care transition, with DSRIP and a number of DSRIP projects going on. We have OASAS and their systems transformation, the adult and home and community-based services implementation, along with ongoing post-implementation for New York City and the rest of the state adult system. And so when we think about some of the services for the Medicaid eligible children, as we've covered in the prior webinars, all Medicaid covered services are available through the Comprehensive Medicaid Benefit Package in New York State, where they're paid for by the Medicaid Managed Care Plan or by the fee-for-service payment system. For children, the system today includes some services managed and paid for by Medicaid Managed Care, but the majority of the specialty behavioral health services are carved out in a fee-for-service payment system. As you will see in the blue box, this includes children's behavioral health services, a limited array of home and community-based services, and care coordination, OMH, targeted case management, and the children's waivers. As we move toward full managed care implementation, the current Medicaid behavioral health services, health home coordination for children, the 6 new SPA services, and the home and community-based benefit services will move under the Medicaid managed care for those children who have Medicaid and can enroll in a managed care plan. The managed care plans will pay for any services authorized and used by their enrolled members out of their monthly managed care premium. For children who are eligible for Medicaid but excluded from enrolling in the Medicaid managed care plan, they will receive the comprehensive Medicaid benefits for which they are eligible in the fee-for-service payment system. New York State will pay providers for any services authorized and delivered to eligible children. Children in foster care that are cared for in voluntary foster care agencies in the community and categorically eligible for Medicaid will also have their services paid for by the Medicaid managed care plans. This transition is very similar to that of the community-based foster care children in 2013. And also just want to hit that there's a correction here that the start date of the Kids Health Homes is actually September 1st of 2016, so I wanted to make that correction. So the Children's Medicaid State Plan Amendment, let's talk a minute about those. In prior webinars, we have reviewed the 6 new state plan services which are listed in the first bullet on the slide. There is other work that is in progress to move us toward a January 2017 implementation date, and that includes that the state partners are still working on the final details of the SPA application, and it's expected to be submitted in April. Funding is included in the proposed budget under consideration in the legislature for the next fiscal year. The SPA provider manual is in draft and expected to be released soon. The manual will detail the requirements of these new services, but please note that anything in the manual is subject to change until final approval by CMS. Also, at the in-person sessions that MCTAC will be holding across the state in March and April, we're hoping to review more detail on each of these 6 services, and our hope is to provide detail around implementation of the design. Next, we'll talk about the alignment of the 5 1915C waiver services under one array of home and community-based services benefits. The services that are proposed in the amendment actually would give the state the authority to include these services in its comprehensive benefit package and pay for these services within both the Medicaid managed care and the fee-for-service payment systems. So again, these are all of the services that they are hoping to align under one array of home and community-based services benefits. And so next I'm going to turn it over to Andy to discuss some of the preparation for managed care.
Hi everybody. Hi Yvette. Sorry about that. I had only taken off one of my mutes. All right, so I'm going to just take a couple minutes to talk a little bit about the readiness assessment we've done. Many folks, particularly children's providers, have already done the readiness assessment, so we'll go through this relatively quickly, but we want to give folks the opportunity, particularly if they've been working a lot on readiness over the last year, if they want to take a chance and kind of review this again. Many people have taken the opportunity on the adult side now that they've spent a lot of time working on getting ready for managed care to actually redo this, and they're starting to see kind of a different kind of look at where their agency is at. So our managed care readiness assessment is really designed to help organizations get ready for the transition to managed care. It's broken up into 11 domains, and I'll talk about those very briefly in a second. But those 11 domains really are a consensus view of what we think is going to be needed to get ready for managed care. We've had adult and children's providers weigh in on this. We've had adult managed care companies, children's managed care companies. We've had the children's team at OMH, OCFS, and DOH weigh on this, as well as a number of local LGUs. So it really does represent kind of and a number of the advocacy groups as well. So it really does represent kind of a consensus view of what's going to be needed to prepare for managed care. There's 11 different domains ranging from kind of the priorities of managed care to contracting to how to communicate back and forth and deal with service authorizations, those kinds of things, really looking at level of care criteria, IT, a whole number of different finance and billing, obviously, and then also down at the bottom, but critically important, the whole issues of outcomes, evaluation, and really what will be important not only in this transition, but then again starting as we move towards the transition to value-based payment, which will be coming kind of right on the heels of this. I'll also just pause for 1 second here and remind folks that over the course of our presentation today, please feel free as they come to you to chat in any questions that you may have, and we'll address those obviously at the end, but that doesn't mean that you have to hold on to them until the end before you chat them in. So based on the more than 500 readiness assessments we've received so far, this is kind of our average scoring on these things by domains, and then if you look at the middle of this slide, you'll see the total average score. So these are all scored on basically a Likert scale or scaled up to that in the scoring we do. So a 1 is, I have no idea what this is and I need all sorts of help, and a 5 is, I feel completely comfortable and ready with this particular area. So you'll notice that, you know, kind of in the middle, the average score is right around a 3, which is basically, I know about this, but I still might need some help, which is kind of what we'd expect. And the areas that are the higher are interface, which is like integrated health, priorities, access, finance, contracting, and IT. We do see a lot of difference in contracting between agencies that already have existing contracts with managed care companies versus those that don't, which is exactly what you expect. And the areas that we are kind of below the Mendoza line, so to speak, are areas around level of care criteria, member services, quality, and evaluation. So that's kind of where people globally fall out. And one thing I always want to mention, just be really clear, is that if you do complete a readiness assessment, we will not share your individual level data with anybody. We obviously present aggregate reports like we're just talking about here, but we don't share anybody's individual level readiness data with either the state or LGUs or other providers or anything like that. What we do is we provide you with an individualized report which looks just like this, except with your data in it. And if you look at the, hold on one second, if you look at the first column there, which I've just circled, it highlights the average score around the state, and then it highlights your score. It highlights your score, so you can compare your score to the average score, and then puts you in the percentile of all the other scores around the state. So before we dive back in, I believe I'm going to hand it back to Yvette at that point. I also want to talk a little bit about some of the kind of very, very preliminary lessons we're starting to learn from the New York State rollout in the city for adults. So the New York State for adults in New York City has gone live and into managed care starting in October. So we're starting to get some initial lessons learned there that we just want to highlight for folks. So the first thing is understanding the process for those who are either excluded or in the process for those who've been carved in or carved out. One of the things that we got a lot of questions before we went live, and we still get a lot of questions, is basically what we like to call who's in and who's out. So we get a lot of questions about that. So in the webinars, the last 2 webinars, the state folks have gone through who's going to be carved in and who's out. I pay really, really close attention to kind of the granularity there, because it's an area that we still continue to get questions. We still get a lot of questions in an area of continuing kind of ongoing discussion and dialogue is around the workflow, particularly for how people get into and out or excluded from HCBS services. So that's going to be a really important area to pay attention to as we get closer to go live. Defining roles and responsibilities. The communication plan within your agency is critically important. One of the things that we see a lot is we get the higher level folks to come to a training, which is totally appropriate, but the dissemination method of that information either up and down the chain in the organization is an area that we've noticed a lot of people are really struggling with, and so what happens is, you know, parts of the organization are very clued into all these changes and then other parts aren't. Sometimes it's hierarchy, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just different departments, so you want to be really clear about that. Also, plan of care requirements, particularly when we get to HCBS services, a plan of care requirement is going to be really important. And then documentation, and authorization requirements are really critically important. They are going to vary somewhat. There are going to be some really clear really clear structured rules on the OCFS, the OASAS, and the OMH side around and authorization requirements. But then within that, the plans have a lot of flexibility and there's a lot of nuance. We will do a lot of work with the plans in the background prior to go live to really try to flush out that nuance so people know what the rules are, but there's still going to be a lot of work, especially within an agency, to kind of organize that. Also, the designation process, both for HCBS services as well as for on the KID side, is going to be really critically important on the SPA service side, because the SPA services are going to be state plan services, which means the designation or licensure process is going to be a little more complicated, so we will pay close information for that. Billing and rate information. The biggest thing that we run into is around billing and rates, also around this issue of testing. Unless the contracting is done in an adequate period of time prior to go live, providers aren't going to have adequate time to test. And testing your claims process is really a critical process to being ready for the transition. And we like to call it live testing if you do it after go live. And that just means it's real claims, and it's really a real big risk. And then the importance of using ePASIS and eMedNey to kind of see where people are in the process, and also see what plans people have. So with that, I'm passing it to Dan, who's going to walk us through the training plan.
Thanks, Andy.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see everyone here for part 3 of 3 of the webinar series as we move towards walking through our training approach for 2016 and some of the technical assistance that will be made available to providers. So let's get started on this front. And Andy, were you drawing on the screen?
I was drawing on the screen. You can too.
That's pretty incredible.
If you circle with the pointer, you can draw.
Oh, very fun. All right. Well, let's wait until we at least get a slide or two in until we start drawing all over our beautiful slide deck. So, for the training approach for 2016 for the KID system, there's a couple of ways that we want to approach this. And first and foremost, we wanted to start things off by revisiting the system transformation on a large level, which is what we're doing right now in partnership with the state agencies through this introductory webinar series. We've gotten great feedback from folks, which we really appreciate, and also some really positive questions and ideas and suggestions for areas that we can delve a little further into as we start to move forward into our TA and training plans. So leading into that is the in-person system transformation update events. So those will be offered statewide beginning in less than a month, actually, in Long Island and New York City. These are 3 to 4 hour sessions, including in-depth presentation by the state agency's children's leadership team and some follow-up discussion with the providers who are able to attend. If you also happen to be an adult provider, this approach might be reminiscent of the kickoff series for the adult transition to Medicaid managed care, which took place back in September of 2014, though I promise and guarantee that the content here will be completely different and updated for the KID system transformation, as there are a few different moving parts, as if you've been paying attention to the webinar series, you're well aware of. So the target audience of these events is the executive leadership of child serving agencies, the plan representatives, and then other stakeholders who are impacted by or interested in the transformation and more information around it. And specifically, what we're going to be talking about is a really detailed overview of the program, services, and members transitioning to managed care, provider protections, home and community-based services, the state plan amendment and SPA, the timelines for all of this implementation, both in terms of go-live dates as well as on the technical assistance front, when we expect providers to be needing to really ramp up for different elements of the transformation and transition along the way. So we'll be spending some time as well at the very tail end of the trainings, going a little bit deeper with more specifics about supports and technical assistance, and specifically what providers can be doing between these trainings on their own ends with their own managed care readiness and implementation teams to prepare for the transformation. And as I'm clicking through, I'm seeing a few notes come through requesting more screen drawing. So thanks for the positive feedback to everyone. And as we'll go through, maybe we'll surprise some folks with some coloring in the lines here. So just an overview, if you haven't seen the announcement, it went out last week. I know we've covered this schedule in past presentations, but in reality, the best way to figure out more information about these events is to go to mictac.org under the events tab. And there are registration links for all of these individual events. We have spaces set up that can accommodate a pretty significant number of people for all of these, and we've tried to cover as best as we can the various geographic regions, so most providers shouldn't have too far to go in order to come to one of these things. And a special thank you to our partners at New York State who will be joining us in different combinations for all of this roadshow, so to speak. But so we'll be starting in Long Island and New York City, then moving to Hudson Valley and Albany, and then Buffalo, Elmira, and Syracuse trio, followed by something I just wanted to mention for the North Country on April 19th, in conjunction with the North Country Behavioral Health Network. They're likely having some kind of a gathering of their providers on the 20th, and so between the 19th and 20th, we'll be running through the children's transformation information. Oh, that flows off the tongue very nicely. The children's transformation information in some forum. So what we'll wind up doing is sharing with folks a specific schedule of events. We'll be doing other technical assistance as we're up there, but so we'll make really clear to folks exactly when the children's part is in case you're interested in joining in person if you're not able to make it to the Syracuse or Albany presentations and you are in the North Country. So again, just in terms of our training approach, so there's really three, I guess, big buckets that we're looking at the training in TA and how it's broken out, one of which is SPA services or the state plan amendment, the other two being managed care transition as well as home and community-based services. But based on the current timeline of implementation, which for SPA is January 1st, 2017 for the New York State, we'd look in June or July to begin talking about the designation process and billing, a very high-level service-by-service overview, and those offerings would be both in-person and web-based. And then as we get closer, so September, October, start to hone in more on the very specifics and logistics of actual implementation. So I won't go through all of the content here, but the slides are posted on mctac.org as I speak. So if you'd like to take a closer look at what would be coming in terms of the training offerings in September, October, November, December, please feel free. And then for managed care, if you also happen to serve adult populations, some of this might look and sound somewhat familiar as it's resembling our strategy and approach to supporting adult providers with the transition to managed care. But so essentially the main buckets that we'll walk through are contracting and credentialing, revenue cycle management, utilization management, and outcomes. I think we called it RCMUM with a sprinkling of outcomes at that level. An implementation series. So as it gets closer and this information is made available via the plans and via the state, all working in partnership with providers to actually walk through things like the billing manual, the UM guidelines, and credentialing. So we saw in New York City that happen a few months before the go live date, and so we're hopeful for rest of state that we'll be able to follow that same model and get that information out to folks on the front end. And then we've also been working on a data and outcomes quote-unquote roadmap, which is different from New York State's roadmap for a value-based payment system, but it's what we're considering to be our real first look at going beyond understanding your population and starting to move people toward a value-based payment model. So more to come on that front soon. And again, those are assuming implementation dates of January 1st, 2017 for New York City and Long Island, and July 1st, 2017 for rest of state. So I'm going to take a deep breath and pass things over to my colleague, Boris Logorin, as we switch who's in the pilot seat. I didn't do any drawing, so I'm hoping Boris can make up for my lack of artistic skills while he's talking through the next few slides. He's going to walk us through what folks can expect to come away with from the contracting, credentialing, UM, RCM, billing, implementation trainings.
Great, thank you, Dan. Unfortunately, my artistic skills are not good, but we will do a deeper dive onto what we're going to cover in the contracting and credentialing webinars and presentations. So one of the first pieces that a provider in transitioning into managed care needs to really accomplish is the contracting and credentialing. And one areas of confusion sometimes from the provider side is they believe that all they need is a contract, sign and execute it, which can take time on its own, and that is all they need to be considered a network. There's a second piece that comes along with contracting, which is credentialing as well, and we just want to make sure that folks recognize and realize that unless the provider has fully contracted, executed the contract, and credentialed with the managed care company. They're not fully in network as a provider. So some of the things that well, to look out for, especially with new contracts versus established contracts, for those providers who already have contracts, especially on the adult side possibly, or even for the children with managed care organizations, a number of managed care companies, if not all of them, tend to follow the protocol of just adding amendments or addendum to your contracts rather than starting a whole new process. But of course, during the contracting fairs and other types of information dissemination, we'll provide more in-depth information, and of course, you should always talk to the managed care company, especially if you're already a contracted entity, to see which route to go. But again, one of the possibilities is just an amendment to your contract. And of course, if you're a provider that has no managed care contracts or does not have a contract with a particular managed care company, and starting from scratch, you would have to do a full-blown contract, excuse me, and of course go through the credentialing process just to, and again, the contracts at this stage, just two major points about the contracts of state protection, but we'll go more in-depth during our in-person presentations on state protections, is of course the Medicaid rates are going to be for 2 years from the implementation date. So if the dates hold for July 1st for New York City, it'll be 2 years from July 1st, on January 1st, I'm sorry, for New York City, and July 1st for the rest of state, and 5 or more clients. And what that really means is that if you're serving 5 or more of the managed care members, the managed care organization will have to contract with you for that particular program and those services. So those, I think, are some of the highlights of state protection. And as I said before, there'll be more discussion during in-person presentation. And of course, the MMIS and NPI, we will be doing presentations and more information on it. When somebody needs an MMIS number versus when somebody might only need an NPI, and we'll be discussing those as more information becomes available. And as we talked about, we'll be doing the technical assistance on our end. We'll be providing contracting fairs and other types of contracting series for the providers. To underscore the credentialing component, one of the things on credentialing side is providers will only need to credential on what's called the facility group level, which means you would need to provide information about your agency, about your sites where you're going to be providing services, your liability insurance, professional insurance, all the other licensure or accreditations that you might have at an agency level or site-specific level. You will not need to credential each individual staff with the managed care company. However, just can't say enough about it. Just because you don't have to credential the individual staff with the managed care company, it does not mean you as an organization should not credential those individuals, because at the end of the day, you need to assure that those individuals meet whatever the requirement of that staff to provide a particular service is needed. So with the credentialing process, there will be applications by managed care companies. You would need to submit some information, but it's actually much simpler than the traditional credentialing process for managed care. We're also going to be doing utilization management. As Dan mentioned, as we have more information, we will be coming together with the plans on this. We have done that on the adult side and provide plan by plan, and of course, the state requirements on utilization management, special authorizations as well. We want to make sure that, the programs to ensure the services are medically necessary, appropriate, and cost-effective, which is kind of the main component of utilization management. Sometimes folks only think about authorization. That is a component of utilization management, but to underscore, it goes beyond that, and it's important to recognize that part of it, or a big component of it, is of course medically necessary, appropriate, and cost-effective services. But again, we'll be doing more of training on that specific. Let's see here. Billing and claims, I think Andy spoke about the importance of testing claims, so it's crucial, and you'll be hearing a lot about it to a point where you'll probably be tired of hearing it, but we can't underscore how important it is. And when we talk about claims testing, and this both applies to the managed care companies and providers, we're talking about real claims testing. We're not talking about sending in an Excel spreadsheet with potentially all the information, and somehow the managed care company processes it and says, yes, that's good. We're talking about submitting a test claim, an 837I or UB04, and having go one through your system and the clearinghouse if you're using it, making sure your system and clearinghouses are up to par, and at the same time that the managed care company can accept it and process it appropriately. So when we talk about billing and claims testing, we're really referring to actual testing and no other means. We'll be going over the billing manual and guidelines and technical assistance. For that, we will be providing the billing in-person presentations. Again, we'll be working closely with the plans to make sure that if there's any nuances or any information you need to know about a plan, that we can provide that in one place. We'll cover, as we have done with adult piece of revenue cycle management, what it is, what it involves to do revenue cycle management, and why you should be doing it versus just billing and claiming. And here's a proposed kind of way to approach this as a provider in regards to a time frame. So what we see, again, if the January 1st date holds, but we see July, August, and September being the 3 months where providers really should be contracting and credentialing. I think anything earlier than that might be too early, and I think it's important to underscore, one, information is needed, both for the plans to know what to put in the contract, you as a provider need that information. So we're really seeing the whole, kind of starting to talk to the managed care companies, starting to work with the managed care companies, not really starting till July in regards to really, kind of moving into that process, especially with spa services and other services. It's, probably, the right time. Following that, the contracting and credentialing would be the claim testing, which should take place in October, November, and December. And then, of course, the billing will commence in later part of January, February, March, and be ongoing. So again, I think it's important to underscore, we do get a number of questions. Should I already be talking to the managed care company and contracting with them now? I think that would be too premature. I think if you want to have some introductory discussions or start building relationships, that's different. But I don't think they're ready to contract, and you might get wrong contracts or with wrong information on it, with wrong rates or wrong timelines and so forth at this point. So I think that would be too premature for the contracting and credentialing component. And again, the training approach for HCBS at this point would be July. We're hoping that we would be able to do service definition, similar kind of what we talked about with spa services. September, we're looking to do the plan of care and workflow, how that would all fit in, how much health homes are involved, not involved, and so forth. October, November, the rates and billing for it, and then November we'll continue with utilization management, the referral process, and December, the detailed overview of each service, getting more in-depth and a much deeper dive with HCBS services in December. So some of the tools that's already available and up and being expanded and keep being updated. So the managed care matrix, we're in the process of adding all the rest of the state. Right now it's all geared towards the adult transition. So right now New York City is live, and when the rest of state information becomes available, we hope in another week or two. Again, this is all going to be for now adult, but you can look on kind of the type of information that's available there. Billing claims, we have done an in-depth presentation on the billing claims, how to fill out a UBO 40837I form. So that's available. We have a glossary of terms. We have a utilization management presentation that, again, we have done for New York City adult transition into managed care. So if you want to get a sense of when I talk about utilization management, it gives you that kind of sense of what you might be expecting. And we're still developing credentialing and charge master presentations at this time. Those are not available yet on our website. This is just a snapshot of the Matrix tool, in case you haven't seen it. And as you can see, New York City is live, but hopefully in a week or two, the whole state will be live with that. There's resources and more information that's available that we wanted to point your attention to. And of course, there's the OMH, and DOH, boxes here or information. So again, as this, as you pull down this, it'll be available for you. And if I can flip the slide, and our last slide is, as always, please feel free to send us information at mictac.info@nyu.edu. And with that, I will turn this to, I think it's Dan. I'm turning this to you.
It's me.
Thank you.
Hi again, everyone. So it's a wonderful game of musical chairs. So we're going to take a few questions off the top that have come through during the webinar. Just as a reminder, if you haven't already, to please submit your questions in the chat box on the side. And we've gotten a few great questions already that we'll be taking, and then handing things back over to the state to run through a few policy and timeline-related questions on their end as well. So we'll do our best to manage the influx of questions that are coming through. But please feel free to just to continue sending the questions that you have as they come to mind as we're running through the Q&A for the next 15 or 20 minutes or so. So a couple of things just off the top. So we got a cluster of questions about MCTAC readiness assessment, which Andy had a chance to talk through a little bit earlier in the presentation. So one question was, on slide 15, are the results for child-only serving agencies or for adult and child providers? So for this, the sample was open to both provider types. So it's inclusive of both child exclusive and child adult providers. And then also, how many assessments have we received from child serving agencies that are incorporated into the readiness results? So the numbers presented today include 276 readiness assessment responses, and I believe those responses that are included in this analysis, the initial analysis as we'll call it, were received through June or July of last year, and then presented formally in mid-September. So if you're interested in more of the readiness assessment information and data, looking back, it's divided up by region and provider type. We would just encourage folks to go to mctac.org, look under past events, and it's the Child Serving Agency Readiness Assessment presentation from, I believe it was mid-September. So just encourage folks to go there. So just a quick note, so we have received and sent feedback to a few additional child serving agencies who have sent us readiness assessments since the formal analysis closed. And as Andy mentioned, we're encouraging folks now, if you haven't filled out a readiness assessment, or if you have and are interested in seeing how your standing has changed over time, we'd encourage folks to do that, and we'll be doing another set of analysis if the amount of interest in taking us up on that offer is there. But just to mention that, so the numbers that we're using are still from the preliminary analysis, or excuse me, the initial analysis, only because, to incorporate readiness data from providers from January or February of 2016 with a sample of agencies that were submitting in April, May, and June of 2015 could potentially look very different. But so again, we'd encourage folks to go and fill out a readiness assessment if you haven't already, or if you'd like to update an updated readiness score to see where you're at this stage of the transformation. And with enough data, we'll be able to actually look and see if there's a difference between where folks are now and then. So that would be exciting. I'm sure a great topic for a future webinar. So one other question before we hand things over to the state, who I'm sure is grouping together to look through a few of the questions that have come through. So one was, do you have a date for the North Country in-person transformation training? So again, that it'll be built into an April 19th day-long MCTAC training in the North Country. So that training will include both kids transformation update as well as, I believe, billing, and a couple of other topics that we want to be able to give and have other things that we tend to offer in person, but that we might not always make it up to North Country as we're doing the rounds around the state to offer exclusively. So there'll be a whole day for folks, and we'll try to make very clear when the schedule and the announcement goes out what part of that day is for the kids transformation update. So if folks are just interested in coming to that component of it, that's totally fine. Of course, you're welcome to come and hear Boris talk about and billing, but you don't always have to stay for that part also. So with that, I'll turn things over to our partners at the state if they wanted to take a few questions that have come in on their end.
Hi all, this is Mimi Weber from OCFS. We got a question, will health home care management implementation have different enrollment phases? For example, foster care population, then the preventive services population, and then the general population. So the answer to that, that information is not correct. I think if you all go back to the health home webinars, we've been very clear that we think that there are populations of kids out there that should be prioritized. They include kids that are maybe currently on a waiver wait list or currently residing in an institutional setting. But we have not done it based upon population phasing in. We're very concerned about overwhelming the health homes and the care management agencies. So we're hoping that folks out there are thinking through very critically the types of kids that could most benefit from health home services come this fall. We're equally concerned about health homes and the care management agencies hiring staff, appropriate staff, and so we recognize that this needs to be a phased-in approach, but we are not prioritizing populations.
Okay, this is Angela Keller from the Office of Mental Health. We have another question specific to contracting, and the question is, do applications currently exist and are managed care organizations standing ready for providers to begin the application process? We covered in the second, or part 2 of this series, that what we're anticipating for both the SPA services and the HCBS services is that there will be some sort of application and designation process where providers who are interested in providing these services will signal to the state that they are willing to, want to, and then we will designate in some way. The details on that are still under discussion. At the point we have determined which providers will be approved to provide the state plan services and the home and community-based services, the managed care plans will receive a list, and for those providers that serve 5 or more children from let's say Plan A, then Plan A will need to contract with Provider B if Provider B serves 5 of their members. So 5 children are enrolled in that plan. But the MCOs at this juncture are not standing ready to begin the contracting process on the kids' design. The other question is, do we have any data on the number of child-serving agencies that do not have a contract with MCOs? We have some rough sense of how many may have involvement, mostly due to previous services that have already transitioned to managed care, such as outpatient clinics or inpatient. So certainly we would expect that all of those child-serving agencies would already have contracts, but for the majority of the home and community-based services, most providers probably do not have a contract with managed care. Another question came up, how do fee-for-service agencies fit into the preparation schedule? We spent a lot of time distinguishing in the part 2 of this series the difference between the fee-for-service Medicaid payment system and the Medicaid managed care payment system. So I really encourage the person asking this question to go back to part 2. Agencies that currently provide the list of services that will transition to managed care, and you are probably billing fee-for-service for some of the children that you serve, you will be billing managed care someday in the future. But again, there's a lot more detail on the nuances of that and which services are impacted in part 2 of the series.
So we seem to be getting a lot of questions around billing and payment, and we can certainly appreciate from everybody your anxiety around getting that information. Unfortunately, we're just not at a place in time where we're able to discuss really sort of the rates and billing at this point. As soon as the information is available, we certainly understand the need to get it out to folks.
And in addition, this is Angela Keller again. We are receiving a number of questions regarding Health Home. There will be an upcoming Health Home webinar that will be scheduled, and we'll continue on the Children's Health Home implementation side to provide updates. And we'll certainly forward these questions to those staff at the Department of Health that would be preparing that webinar. McTack, I think if there's other questions related to training, go ahead and take it back.
Fantastic. So we'll take a couple more, see what else comes through, pass it back over to you. This is working great. Thanks for being flexible with the geographical distance between where we're doing this from. So a couple of questions that came through about MCTAC trainings and tools as I'm just scanning through really quickly. So how does the MCO matrix fit for a children's day treatment provider? So just in a general response is our approach to the matrix is to try to save providers time from all having to individually find all of the respective information from every individual plan that they're contracted with and to keep track of that. It's a pretty heavy lift, and we've got great support from the MCOs, and we really appreciate them taking the time to work with us, both to supply the information and to help guide our thinking about how the information is presented. So as we move a little bit closer towards when we'll start looking at contracting and credentialing for the kids transformation, if I'm remembering our timeline slide correctly, I believe that's July-ish under the current timeline. Our goal would then to be having as much information for kids providers up there related to the MCOs ahead of that. And so we'll be working with the plans leading up to that to capture things like if there are program-specific contacts or individuals that they'd like to list in the matrix for specific like children's provider types. So I hope that helps to answer the question. Another thing that came through, actually I wanted to take a second. So we've gotten a couple of comments about acronyms, and we truly and genuinely appreciate that feedback. I think, we're going to have to come up with some kind of something here in the office. The person who says the most acronyms on a webinar has to get coffee the next day or something like that. I see nods from my colleagues, mostly because it would probably be one of the two of them. But so, as with all things, when we're doing so much work in this area, sometimes it just becomes a bit of a bad habit. We're trying as much as we can to really limit it to things like maybe HCBS or SPA, the things that are like on the headers of slides that we're hoping folks are starting to get a better familiarity with what those things mean, home and community-based services and day plan amendment, respectively. But just to say, if something does come up in an acronym in passing at a presentation in a meeting you're in, as you're looking through slides that MCTAC has put out or the state's put out, we do have a tool that was designed specifically for that, which is it's the acronym guide, which is part of a glossary and managed care language reference guide as well, which is under tools and resources on the MCTAC page. And then also, by all means, the general comment is very well taken, and also we're 100% happy if there's a specific acronym that you're not sure of or that's mentioned or you'd like clarification of during a presentation, that we would be, just feel free to chat that into us. and let us know what that acronym is, and we're happy to take a step back and spend a little bit of time just talking about what it is and how it fits in with everything. So just wanted to mention that, and just thank everyone for keeping us honest when it comes to the acronym usage in our presentations and conveying some of this information. So a question that came in that I'm actually going to point towards Andy and Boris to maybe comment on here. So it was just a comment about the timeline and the training schedule, and how the timeline or training schedule is or isn't giving providers enough time to properly prepare for the transition that's happening.
So, I mean, I think we've tried to structure the timeline and the training schedule to mirror when the correct information is available, also with an eye towards being able to give folks time to implement that information and get their agencies ready to go. I mean, I think in contrast to what on the adult side in the city, where it was the first time this was rolling out, it was a much more compressed time frame. I think we're trying to, particularly for the adult upstate rollout and then the kids rollout, to really time things sequentially when it's reasonable to expect that information to be available, and also when agencies start to focus on things. So when we're talking about doing contracting fairs 4, 5, 6 months out, that's about the time you should be starting to iron out contracts with your agencies. We'll be working to do billing and 2 to 3 months out, which is about when that information will be finalized and also when that information will be available and give you plenty of time to update your EHRs and those kinds of things. The SPA services, we're going to start, 6 months out, because you'll have to go through the application process. You'll have to get ready to up to speed. One of the things there's a conscious choice not to do things too far out, because what happens when you do things too far out is, one, people aren't necessarily paying attention, particularly those providers who are going to be doing both adults and kids. And so sometimes it gets lost and it doesn't, it doesn't quite have the attention. And two, particularly on issues where people are going to have to implement stuff, if you go back to your agency, you get something ready to go, and then it sits for 6 months, the knowledge kind of dissipates, and then it's not really ready to know. So we're trying to find that appropriate time frame where things are far enough out to prepare, but not so far out that they really kind of lose their momentum before you really go live. If there are particular areas where you think we're doing it too far out, please feel free to shoot us a note at mctech.info@nyu.edu, and we'd be glad to take that into consideration. Some of these timeframes also have to deal with, when policy decisions are made, and obviously, like CMS has to make decisions. There's a whole kind of cascading of things that go into the timeframe.
Yeah, I would also just to add on to that, maybe not for state plan amendments or home and community-based services, but especially for the managed care transition piece, if folks are really eager or looking to get a sense for what the training might look like, to utilize the resources and trainings that were offered on the adult side. It's going to change and be tailored and be different in some areas, but to get a general sense of how folks can be thinking about it and preparing on their own ends, I think is a really helpful way if you're one of those the folks who are looking to get a jump or a head start on it.
And I would take billing as a good example of that. Billing is billing is billing. It's going to be it'll be very few differences between what a clinic bill looks like on the kid side versus a clinic bill on the adult side.
Great. And before we turn it back over to the state for any last questions, something just came in about regions that don't have MCOs listed on the matrix. So we are in the process literally now, hoping to have it launched and live in the next week, of adding managed care organizations that will be conditionally designated for adults for the rest of the state. So in the next week, the entire map should be active with MCOs for adults, which includes conditionally designated for rest of state counties and regions. So hope that helps, and stay tuned on that front. We'll be sure to include an update when all that information is live. So before we wrap, just wanted to turn things back over to Angela, Mimi, and company in Albany to see if there's anything else that they wanted to address off the top.
Hey, Dan, we got another question that we'd like to address, and it comes from a voluntary foster care agency, and it's asking whether what MCOs should they be trying to contract with. And so we certainly recognize that voluntary foster care agencies who care for children who've been placed in foster care are confronted with some very unique challenges. Oftentimes children are placed outside of their community, and outside of maybe the geographic area that their managed care plan prior to coming into foster care might have been in. And so, you know, at this point, I think it's only fair to say that we recognize those unique challenges. We recognize the importance of continuity of care. There's some very intense conversations that are occurring at the state level around establishing per member per month rates for kids in foster care. Certainly recognize that the voluntary foster care agencies are highly dependent currently on their Medicaid per diem, and we're trying to think through the concept of a residual per diem. We also recognize that foster care agencies might need to contract and be credentialed with the plans in a different way than a non-foster care agency. And so that conversation is also going on. So again, I think it's only fair to say that there's recognition across the state that when it comes to foster care agencies and how we provide health care, comprehensive health care to those children, that we need to account for a set of special circumstances and maybe some special policy considerations as a result of that. So our best advice is stay tuned. We certainly understand the challenges, and we're working towards solutions.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mimi. So we're running right up against 1 o'clock, so we're going to call it a presentation and a 3-part webinar series with that. Wanted to thank everybody for joining today, and also especially to those who have been with us since the first presentation, I guess just about 6 weeks ago. This has been a really great and informative process for us, and hope it's been for you as well. Special thanks to Angela, Keller, and Mimi Weber for doing a great job with questions today, and all their colleagues at the state as well, who I'm sure are standing in the background as well. With that, if there are other questions, please feel free to send them in to mixtech.info@nyu.edu. And Andy Kleek is literally jumping up and down in the back of the room right now, encouraging folks to sign up for the in-person kickoffs, the transformation update events, starting next month in March. We're there already, almost, in Long Island and New York City. So until next time, we'll look forward to seeing you then. Thanks so much.